Well, welcome to Church360 Ledger, the complete overview training webinar. My name is Peter Frank, and I will be leading this session today. There's my face with my contact information. I am the manager of Concordia Technology Solutions. And for those of you who may not be aware, Concordia Technology Solutions is the church software end of or division, I should say, of Concordia Publishing House. Our company has been around for 146 years, and we have been producing software since the mid-'80s. So we've been doing this quite a while. I manage our team here and help oversee product development. If you have any questions, please, by all means, contact me at my email address, peter.frank@cph.org, or my phone number there, 314-268-1408. I really enjoy talking with people who are in the field working in churches and hearing how we can help better serve you. So please contact me with any questions. The email is the best way to reach me. I'm often not at my desk, so I don't always get to my phone calls live, but I'm always happy to return them if you leave a voicemail. So today we're going to be talking about Church360 Ledger, and we've got quite a few things to go over. This webinar will last about 90 minutes or so. It will be about 60 minutes presentation and then another 30 minutes for question and answer. During this, we'll be going through a complete overview of what Church360 Ledger is and why we built it the way that we did. And then we'll go through the bulk of our presentation, which is the tour of the software. And lastly, we'll have the question and answers. So this is being recorded, so if you can't stay for that whole time, you are welcome to drop off. We will be sharing this with you via email later on today or tomorrow. We'll give you a link, and that way you can share it with other people. It'll be available on our YouTube channel, free for future viewing as well. If you have questions as we go, please go ahead and submit them. I will try to answer everything, hopefully answer everything as I go through the presentation. But if I don't, that'll be the time that I'll answer them. So ask them at any time. I will answer them at the end if I don't do it beforehand during the presentation. I believe that is all for housekeeping items. Let me just double check. Yeah, I think that's it. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, Church360 Ledger is church finance software. And as we have developed this software, we focus on a few different things. First off, it is intuitive, meaning that regardless of your background in finances, we hope that this will be able for you to use it. So and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes, the different people that we thought of as we were developing the software. It's also secure, and that is always first and foremost in our mind of things to accomplish, because we are dealing with finances, and so it has to be very secure because it's such a sensitive issue, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. And lastly, it's focused. So you see there we've got our little icon of the pastor with the collar on there. It's focused on ministries. There's plenty of finance software out there, and there's some really good ones, but they are built for either personal finances or for business finances, and church finances is a little bit different than either of those. Not to say that it's more or less complex, but it requires less than a lot of the business software does. You don't have a product that you're selling, you don't have to keep track of inventory, but also requires more than personal finances because you're dealing with a variety of different accounts and users and such. And so we've tried to hit that nice sweet spot. I'll show you how we do that in a variety of different ways, but let's get into kind of the spirit, the heart behind the software. All right, there's that nice offering plate. Well, as I'm sure you know, talking about church finances is difficult. And whenever there's a sermon about stewardship, I'm sure you can see the pastor sweating, or I can see you hearing the slight groans of the congregation. But talking about church finances is different for one main reason. It's because every dollar has been donated. And so there's a certain sense of ownership from the members of the congregation with the dollars that have been given to the church. And that's not a bad thing at all. It's just something that's important to keep in mind. Everything goes into the offering plate, or maybe it goes directly into the bank account if you're using electronic giving. But the real thing behind that is every donation comes from the heart. And so that's that personal investment into the church's ministry, and that's a very good thing. We are called to support the work of the church because that is how the gospel is shared from the church as a whole and through the funds that are donated. But because every donation comes from the heart, that makes stewardship so much more critical. We have to use our funds very well. And here at the publishing house, we remember that most of our customers are congregations, and the funds that they use to purchase from us are donated. So that not only makes stewardship important for the church, it makes stewardship important for us, and so we understand that. Because stewardship is so critical, accountability becomes critical. And accountability is making sure that the funds are being managed in a correct and right way. It's very similar to stewardship, but accountability is making sure that each person is accountable for their actions related to the church finances. So when we talk about things like the church staff or volunteers, what does accountability look like in that setting? Well, accountability is really, and we view it in two different ways. First and foremost is preventing the ill intention from doing wrong. There are many situations that you'll hear about the news of a church worker who has fallen into the temptation of embezzling funds, and there's always the proper punishment that goes into that, as it should. But as we built Church360 Ledger, we kept in mind, how can we at least prevent that the best possible way? Somebody who is really intending to do wrong cannot necessarily be stopped by software. Because if they lie, then they're lying, and it doesn't look wrong. But we can help you find that, and we can help track all the actions, and that's really what we've done within Church360 Ledger. But on another side of accountability, and this goes to the proper management of funds, we can prevent the well-intentioned from making mistakes. So some of this is just, it's not meant to be taking money from the church or anything like that. It's just there's some mistakes that can be made in church finances, and we work to prevent that. And that goes back into that accountability, to that stewardship, that caring for the funds that are donated to the church. This is one of my favorite pictures of the church. I love just how the sun's coming through. So how do you do this accountability in the congregation? Well, that's really what we're here to talk about today. So as you do it, you look at the different people who are going to be involved. And so at a church, you may have somebody who is a volunteer ministry treasurer. And so we put that in the plural sense. When you think about the different groups, the men's club, the ladies guild, the youth group, they often have somebody who's dedicated to be a treasurer for that group to manage the funds. Well, often if your church has that luxury, you'll have individuals within those ministries, but then also somebody who's a paid finance coordinator who can really take care of the day-to-day details. And those treasurers can work with that person to make sure that the funds are there and that they are submitting payments correctly, and the paid finance person can hold those treasurers accountable. Well, often the person who holds the finance coordinator accountable is the elected church treasurer. And so you have that one person who works with the finance coordinator who's a volunteer, but who's selected by the congregation to kind of oversee all of the funds. But even that person has the additional accountability of having a finance board that they may oversee, but the finance board is additional people who can help review the finances and make sure that everything is right and properly done. So you've got accountability at these different levels that are based on people. So as we go into Church360 Ledger, it was designed to increase accountability. And we do that by preventing mistakes and by making it secure. So as we looked at, we focused on kind of two key personas. And this is what really helped me as we were talking about it in the planning stages, is that every feature and every way that we implemented was kind of held up against these two different people. All right, so first let's focus on this gentleman here. This gentleman we're calling the church treasurer, and he is an experienced accountant. He oversees all aspects of the finance, and he really cares about the details. And because he cares about the details, he relies on the audit trail very heavily. And as I had this person in mind, I think to the treasurer from my congregation, who is who used to be the controller for a hospital. And in talking with him and hearing how he goes about his work, he really cares about every little penny because it's part of the church. And he views that not only is it his ministry, but it's his responsibility to make sure that it is done right. And so these are some of the aspects of the church treasurer that we thought of. On the other hand, we have this nice lady here, and we call her the willing volunteer. So the willing volunteer does not know much about finances, but she knows how to balance her own checkbook. She knows how to enter transactions and do the different types of transactions. Most importantly, she cares about the ministry. And that's one of the reasons why she was a willing volunteer. Even though she wasn't interested as much in the finance side, she knew that the church needs help. And so she cares enough about the ministry that she's willing to take her time and work on it. And lastly, she doesn't want to make mistakes. So she may not know a lot, but she's a willing worker and she's there to do her job. Now, when we thought about this person, it really helped me to think about my mother, who is not a finance person by education or by trade. She was in PR. But she cares so much about the church that when they needed somebody to help with their finances, she volunteered. And she's very organized and she knows how to balance a checkbook, but it's not her passion. Finances are not what she made a career of, but she was willing to help out the church because they needed it. And so we compare these two people and say, how can Church360 Ledger provide the accountability that they both require? The accountability for the willing volunteer to not make the mistakes, but the accountability that the treasurer needs to be able to see all aspects of the congregation. So that's kind of the heart behind Church360 Ledger. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a real-life example and kind of see how that goes into effect. And in doing so, we'll explore all areas of the software. But as we do this, I'd like you to ask yourself, how can I use Church360 Ledger to support my ministry? So put yourself in the shoes of the user. I know many of you have already purchased Church360 Ledger. Some of you have not. But seeing how it would work with your ministry will not only help you visualize how you can use it, but it also might give you some questions to ask as well. So again, ask questions as we go. We'll talk about it, and if there's anything that's left over, we will we'll get that in the Q&A time or in an email after the fact. So let's talk about a real-life example. So this is from my home church, and that's why it's just fresh for me in my mind. I'm not actively involved in it, but it's our cancer care ministry. And what the cancer care ministry is, it's a support group for those who have had cancer or currently have cancer or who are related to those who have cancer. And because of that, it's an in-reach and an outreach for our congregation. And so it hits a couple of our key goals. In doing this ministry, they distribute resources and share that with those who need to read it or need to hear that supporting message. This requires some publicity and some marketing, if you will, church marketing, communications about the different types of events, and they do accept donations. And so the reason I chose this is because you could basically create your own chart of accounts and your own accounting system for this one specific ministry, and that's what we're going to look at. And sometimes taking things down to a very simple level allows us to more easily show all the features of the software, and that's where I'm going with that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch over to Church360 Ledger, and it looks like it's timed out on me, and I want to make sure that I put in my right credentials. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and use our login key. There we go. That's the special key we have to get into our accounts here at the publishing house so that we can help support. So this is the main view. I'm going to zoom it in a little bit. I want to make sure that it's that you're able to see it. And if I zoom out at all, is to show you the detail that's available. But this is the main page. Now, Church360 Ledger is web-based. It's all online. You can access it from anything with an internet connection. And because of that, it's stored on our servers. So I see one of the questions that came up is, how is our data backed up? That is done automatically every single night by our servers, and we keep those backups for 30 days. And so at every given point, we have 30% previous days of backups. Now, that doesn't mean we back up every single minute, so if you made a mistake and it was 15 minutes ago, we probably don't have that in the backup, but I'll show you how to fix those kind of things. But this helps you not get too far away from having a backup of your data, and we really haven't ever had to use that for Church360 Ledger at all, where we've had to pull a backup to assist a customer. There just hasn't been an issue, but we have that available if need be. So this is the main view. We're going to get into this in a few minutes. From here you can get into all your different accounts, but we've got no accounts set up yet. So let's go ahead and set up our chart of accounts. So up here in the navigation under the settings cog, the first option under there is chart of accounts. There's four main types of accounts. There's assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. So we'll set up accounts in each one of them. We're not going to go in great detail, but first off, let's set up a new account, and we're going to call this, let's just call it the bank. And we could put in an account number if we wanted to. We don't have to. It's purely for reference, and we are going to say, you can actually, let me step back. I was going to split that into two. I'm going to step back and create a new category called bank. A category is basically a folder. There we go. And now the new account is going to be our savings account. And we're going to say you can't write checks from this account, and we're going to do an initial balance of 0. Pardon me one sec. Losing my voice a little bit, needed a cough. Okay, so there is our savings account, and we're going to go ahead and submit that, and you can see that it looks a little bit different. It doesn't have that bar over there. That's how we know it's an actual account. I'm going to add another one, another new account that's called checking. And so if you had different banks, you could have different categories, and if you had different accounts in each bank, you could have put those here. But in this simple example, we're going to have a savings account and a checking account. And in this case, this one can write checks. And again, we're going to do it as an initial balance of 0. Oops. There we go. Now, if you use restricted funds, meaning that you set aside certain amounts of for specific purposes, you can add a new restricted fund to any asset account. So let's say in your savings account we're planning an annual event, and people could donate directly to that annual event. You would just do a new restricted fund, and you would call that annual event, and you click submit, and as soon as you click and add a restricted fund, you now have an unrestricted fund for that savings account. And so the bank statements and everything will be reconciled to this master account here, that savings account. But the annual event will have its restricted funds, and then you can see what's available for spending under unrestricted. And that works out really well in a congregation for certain memorials that are dedicated for a very specific purpose. It allows you to keep all the dollars in one place, but the purposes can be separated, so you never spend what's been set aside for something else. So I'm going to go ahead and save it now just to show you this before we add too many things here. So when you go to save it, it'll tell you all the different changes that you've made. So I've rearranged some accounts or categories. I've created one new category. I've created one new restricted fund, and therefore a new unrestricted fund was created, and 2 new accounts were created. Not the exact order that I did it, just a good summary of everything that has occurred. So there's that. So assets are your bank accounts. That's where your actual money lies. Now under liabilities, there's a variety of different liabilities that a church may have, especially when you start dealing with payroll and taxes, and when they deduct taxes to pay it as a whole for the church staff. We're not going to get into that level of detail right here. When I'm thinking about this specific ministry, I think about a liability that they may have. And for some purchases, it may be best to have a credit card. Now, I know many churches don't use credit cards, and for this example, we're just going to go through it because it's a good use of a liability. So we're going to create a new category, and we're going to call that credit cards. And we'll hit submit, and we'll create a new account that says, we'll call it the silver credit card. We'll just leave it at that. And initial balance is 0. We're going to do everything starting at 0. And that way it just shows, again, the categories and the accounts underneath that. And we'll save changes. You can see that as well. We don't have to save changes each time. I always like to, just to make sure I know what I'm doing in here. After liabilities comes income. This is the money that is coming into this account. And there's a variety of different ways that money can come into the church. It's not quite as diverse as within a business, but we're going to put examples here. So let's do a new category called offerings. And that is one way that funds come into the account. And let's go ahead and do a new account and say, let's see. We're just going to call it Cancer Care Fund. So in the church, they may have Cancer Care Funds. And then we'll also call this, let's say, a loose change offering. Oops. And maybe they encourage members to donate their loose change. Oops, there we go. And then let's do another category called events. So that's your category, and then your account may be that it was registration fees for your event. And we'll pull that over. So that's how different money can come into your account. And when you think about it in the church, you've got a lot of those same things where it would come in through the offering plate or come in through an event. My congregation's having a movie night at our church today, and there's $10 for the event. And that's not an offering, that's an exchange for the meal. And so that would be kept separate from the offering fund. So that may be why when you think about a church, you don't often think about the income as much as the donations, but they're one and the same. Just how is money coming into the books? And now we'll go under expenses, and there's a lot of different expenses that a church can have. An individual ministry may often be its own event, so we're going to put a couple categories here, and we're going to call this one publicity. And there's your publicity fund. And so let's see here. Let's call this printouts. I think I would do printouts as one word, or maybe it's two. It's okay. And then we'll do another account. Let's just say this is resources. Make it a very general word. We'll put those over here. Let's do a new category called events, because we have events. We have events in each of these different categories. That kind of helps us be consistent when we're putting in. And we'll do a new account called refreshments. And, well, let's do an advertising for the specific for that. So event advertising. This gives us a few options. All right, we'll save those changes, and you can discard the changes if you wanted, but in this case, we're going to confirm them. And so we have our nice chart of accounts that has some different categories, some different accounts with it, and we've reviewed how to use restricted funds. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at a few of the other options under settings. So we start off with chart of accounts. We're going to go to budgets in just a moment. You can have different fiscal years. That's done at the time of setup, but when you go to fiscal years, you can also change it. So if you're going from a full calendar year and you're going to move to starting in July, let's say, well, you could change your next fiscal year to July, save it, and then you'll end up having a half fiscal year, if you will, as you're doing that transition. I know many churches do have different fiscal years. I also know they don't change it very often, but it does occur. So we give you that opportunity to change it there. We'll talk about reoccurring transactions later on. I want to touch on imported transactions for just a moment. We're not going to show any examples of that today. There's two types of transactions that can be imported. One is payroll transactions, and we've worked with Paychex payroll software to be able to import the payroll transactions. If you work with them, we can get you set up with the right kind of download, where it would download your payroll transactions. You could import it into Ledger, and it'll tie it directly to your chart of accounts. that doesn't apply to everybody, so if you have specific questions about that, be happy to talk with you either offline or have you work with our support team to get you up and running with that. The other kind of important transactions are donations that are entered through Church360 members. That's one of the other products in our suite where you can track all of your members and your donation from those members, as well as electronic donations through Vanco. And all of that can flow in and create a nice single deposit for each week here in Church360 Ledger. So those are the two types. If you have questions about those, I'd be happy to answer them later on, but I'm not going to spend any more time with those than right now. I'm going to go next to general user setting or general settings, where you can enter in the name of your congregation, your address, your phone number. We can also put in your check style, and if we had entered a customer number for you, it would show there too. Basic information. We'll talk about users and permissions later on, but as well as payees. But I do want to talk about books for just another moment. So right here we just have one book. But I know in a congregation there's often different books. So in my congregation we have a church and a school, and in our specific situation they share the same books and they're just different accounts on the chart of accounts. But I know in many schools they are very different, and they have completely different chart of accounts and different people who manage them. So if you are at a single location like that, you need different books, you can add additional books on here. In my congregation, the men's club operates kind of separately and will make donations to the church, but it's done as kind of outside of the church's books. They're just entered in as an actual donation. So you could use Church360 Ledger for them as well. Now the main thing that it shares are the users and the drawing a blank here, the users and the payees, and that's why we have this down here below the line. So anything that's below the line is used by what we call tenant, and anything above the line is used by the actual books, and these are what's used most regularly. So enough about those. Let's talk about budgets, because budgets are always so fun. I don't know a single church who gets excited about budgeting, actually, because this is the time where you have to make hard decisions. But we try to make the process of budgeting as easy as possible. So here you can see our whole chart of accounts, which is very small, but for example purposes, I think it works really well. Your chart of accounts will probably be much longer. You'll notice you only budget income and expense, and that's because where the money is stored and how that moves really is more dependent on how it's coming in and going out than anything else, and it would be too complicated to budget. So if you're new to finances, I wanted to make that clear. If you've been doing finances for a while, I'm sure you're already well aware of how you go about only budgeting income and expense. But let's go ahead and put a few examples in here. If you click on one of those cells, you'll notice that it drops down and gives you two options: previous year budget or previous year actual. Well, right now I don't have anything in here. This is a new account, and as it might be for many of you. But if you have previous transactions in there, this could really help the budgeting process by taking the previous year's either budget number, that's your goals you're trying to reach, or your actuals from last year, and make it a little bit more realistic. And we do that either at an account level, or you can do it at the overall chart of accounts level up here. And whatever you set it to, you can always change it. And so if you have data in there, I'd highly suggest just starting off with one of the two and then tweaking it from there. Well, let's just show how easy it is. So we're going to go ahead and put in $50 a month, and you'll see I'm not using my mouse. All I'm doing is typing in the amount and putting in, clicking the arrow button to move to the next field. So if we do 500 a month, that'll equal up to $650. Well, let's go ahead. October is Cancer Awareness Month. We're going to put in $450 just to give us an even $1,000. And that's our budget. Real small numbers, but doing that for practical purposes of the demonstration. Now I can use my keyboard to just quickly move up and down and left and right across all of these. And since loose change offering is not a big deal, I'm not going to actually put much in there. Under the events, let's say that our annual event was in July, and let's say registration ran usually about $300, and so that gives you your total. And you'll notice that everything rolls up into the master account, rolls up into income, and then you'll see down here your income and expense. And I know many churches try to just make this an even zero at the bottom, that the income and the expense equal out to be exactly the same. Let's go in here to the publicity printouts, and let's just say we do $10 a month for that. Oops. All right, and then under resources, we'll just leave that as kind of a miscellaneous refreshments. Whoops. Let's go here to January, and we'll do $5 each month for refreshments. Probably a little bit low, but that's all right. And then lastly, advertising, and maybe you'll just do a big push, let's say in March, and print out a whole bunch of things for $200. So you'll see there, month to month, your income less expense is put into place, and overall, it looks like there will be more income than expense because you've done that right there, and you'll see that $920. So we're going to go ahead and save. So that's how you budget. It's really simple. We're looking at ways to make it even better. One of the things that will be coming up in the next few months is to be able to enter in a total amount and then just split it across all the months. We're also investigating the opportunity to import budgets that may be a little bit longer off than that. But just some different ways of entering offerings. I know I kind of oversimplified it here by my few number of accounts, but there's still a lot of different opportunities there for us to get better and for you to use it to the best of your ability. So that is budgets. Let me go next. We talked about fiscal years. I want to go into users and permissions. So we're going to start with permissions. And what you can do with permission roles is you can create these different roles and then assign them to people. And each one can have a different level of access to Church360 Ledger. So let's call this the volunteer. And in terms of management, you don't want them to manage the tenant or manage the chart of accounts, but they might be able to print checks. They should be able to create deposits, create payments, create transfers. If they can print checks, they should be able to create them. They can edit transactions as well, or maybe you prevent editing transactions and journal entries and just let them make the regular transactions. And in this case, we're going to say can see all accounts, but maybe you want it to only be a subset of accounts. So we'll save that, and you can see that that now limits what is shown there compared to the administrator role. Well, then up here under users, you can go to users and add a new one and say, we'll put the email address in, and we'll do ctscommunity@cph.org, and we'll put them under volunteer, and then we'll submit it. Oops, looks like that one's already been taken. I'll go ahead and do 360ledger.volunteer@cphaptest.com. That's our email generator that allows us to create a lot of unique emails. So one of the things that we do require is that each email in our database is unique, so that you only have access to one account. If you do have multiple accounts that you need access to, you will have to use different email addresses. But we find that that's not usually a restriction. It doesn't, or at least it doesn't affect our users. It is a restriction, but not a very impactful one. All right, well, that is how you set up your chart of accounts and get everything ready to go with the budgets. We're going to move into actual transactions now. So if you have any questions about these, while you're thinking about them, go ahead and put them into the question area. I'll answer them at the end, but we are going to shift gears a little bit here. This Ledger button up at the top always takes you to your home page, and you can see here that you've got your 4 account types, and you can use this to drill in. So under Assets, you can go to Banks, and then you can see Savings and Checking, and once you click on Savings, you can go to Unrestricted or Annual Events. Before we do that, I want to show you this Reconcile button that comes up. Because remember, the savings account is a single account. You just have different funds there under annual events restricted versus unrestricted funds. And so you'd reconcile from here. We'll get to reconcile in a little while. But as you go on farther, see under annual event, now you can no longer reconcile it because that's only a specific portion of the transactions, not the whole amount. You can also click up here and erase and see your chart of accounts, and that stays up here the whole time. So if you wanted to go and find your income accounts, you can see all the different ones on there. If you wanted to find a specific one like advertising, you can click in and go there. It really helps you navigate through everything very quickly. I'm going to go back to home here. And you'll see there's a what should be a graph here, but right now we don't have enough line items to construct a graph, and so we'll get to that in a moment. The new transactions, you've got 5 different types of transactions. We're going to look at each one of those in just a few moments. From any view, you can export to Excel or print it, and then you can change your date range here, which really filters you down by different dates and makes it really easy to just keep it consistent. That stays with you from page to page, so some really cool stuff with that. Let's go and create a new transaction. So right now we're all zeros. Let's go ahead and create a new deposit. Start off by putting money in our account. Well, let's say the Cancer Care Ministry was started by one very specific donor who gave $750. And so let's call this the startup donation. And we'll put that back. We have to start it here because I've confirmed my balance. We'll do that as of today. And we won't put in a pay. For deposits, that doesn't really matter. We'll get into that in a little while with actual payments. So we're going to put this $750 under the unrestricted savings. And we're going to call this the Cancer Care Fund. That came through the donation plate. So you can see here that we're saying $750 is being deposited into our unrestricted savings account from this income. And let me go back a second. I went too quickly there. I'm going to erase this. You see that there's an asset there. Because I did a deposit, it shows that it has to come from an income account. It doesn't give me any other options. That's one of the ways that we do this to help you prevent making mistakes. So when you select a deposit, it gives you the type of accounts that you need to use. Now down here, you'll see these are in this T chart. If you're familiar with accounting, that'll sound very familiar to you. You'll see the credits and the debits, and it's a balanced transaction. If you don't know anything about accounting, it's okay. You don't need to know what debits and credits are. You just need to know what this is doing up here. And this is pretty straightforward. It's like putting your paycheck in your bank each month, but just adding the income right here. And if you wanted to put this only as, let's say, $700, it'll tell you still need to assign these additional $50, and maybe that came under the loose change offering. And now it will balance your transaction here as well. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And now you can see assets is $750 and income is $750. Pretty straightforward, right? Gets a little more complicated than that, not too much, but that's just a single deposit. Now let's say we want to transfer funds. So let's say of that $750, 250 of that was for our specific event, and it should be restricted. Now I could have done that at the time of the transaction as well, but we're going to say move to restricted. And a memo is optional. I always like to do it just because it makes a little bit more sense to have something there. But we're going to say from the unrestricted amount, I think I said $250 is going to be moved to the restricted annual event. And it does the credits and the debits. And we'll click Save. And it does it for us. Now our assets haven't changed at all. And if I go to the bank and I go to savings, that account hasn't changed at all. But it's split now between unrestricted and annual event. And so you're just transferring from the one account to the other. I think that should be straightforward as well. You can do this between bank accounts. If you go here under transfer, you'll see you start off with the 4 different options, but as soon as you go into an asset, it only gives you an asset. Let's say that you're correcting a mistake from expenses. If you go from expense, it only gives you the option to choose expenses. And that's how we really help you prevent yourself from making mistakes. We don't let you just put any account in there. Once you start down a path, you have to finish that path or change the path. It really helps you know what you're doing without knowing what you're doing, if that makes sense. All right, so there's some income. Let's talk about how we would go about doing a payment. So let's say that we are going to print out some materials, and we're going to do that as a check. So we'll call this monthly flyer. Keep today's date in there. Now the payee, let's call them Office Express. Now, if you had Office Express in there already, when you clicked on it, you'd give you an option of payees, but we don't have that right now. So we're just going to put in Office Express. And the check number, which we know from our printing our checks, is 123, and you see it shows up there. The checking account that it's coming from is the checking right here. And then the amount is going to be, let's call it $50. Actually, you'll see here, this is what's really helped me. It says here that there's not enough funds. That amount tells me that there's not enough funds in the checking account because I haven't put anything in there. Let's go and do a quick transfer. So, transfer to checking. And we're going to go from unrestricted. Let's go ahead and transfer $250 to our checking account. And we'll save that. Great. You can see it's monitoring this. Now I'm down to $250 in each. Let's go back to check. Office Express, 123, checking, $50. Oops, I'm still getting that. I think I need to refresh. And we'll call that printouts. I think that'll still let me go through since there is actually the money in there. Yep. So I have done this check for $50, and if I go back to my assets, go to bank, oops, and checking, you'll see here now that that's been added. Started with the $250, now I'm down to $50. And if you look here, it hasn't been printed yet, and this nice green message at the top says the check was added to my print queue. Well, let me go ahead and click on that, and it'll take me to the print queue. It's also here. You'll see that printer button with the 1 on it saying that we've got 1 check to print. Well, we can go and select that and go and print that check, and you'll see it shows us what it looks like. So this is a top check, and you can tell because there's less information on the top, but more on the stubs. Now let me go back here, and I'm going to go to Settings, General Settings, and you can change it to the middle of the check. And I'll hit Save. And then we'll go to the check queue and hit Print. Let me go ahead and refresh it real quick. Sometimes you have to refresh to get those changes to take place. And now you'll see it's in the middle of the check. And so when I go to print, it'll say confirm the number for the check. And if I selected the wrong number, I can change it that time. And this is for printing out checks from your printer. So if you have the stubs that can go through your printer, you can put it in there and just watch and see what check number needs to be assigned to it. Those can be purchased through Forms Plus Inc., which is our partner out of Atlanta, and they have these custom checks printed. They're a great company. They work with churches all the time, and we highly recommend them. So that's how you'd get these. If you are handwriting, then you can well, let me cancel and I'll show you. You can click on them and then just mark them as printed. So if you aren't actually printing them, you can go ahead and mark them as printed and say this will be removed from the queue and confirm. And the reason we have a queue is that many churches will do all of their checks on one day of the week. And so throughout the week, these different transactions will kind of get added to the queue, and then at one time they print them all off, and that saves some time and effort. So we'll go back here, and let's go into our checking account. And you'll see here no longer does that little button show up that you need to print it. It's already been printed. So that's how you go about printing a check. Well, one of the things that I do regularly here is Facebook advertising. And so a cancer support group would be very well advised to use Facebook advertising to bring people in from the community. So we're going to go ahead and create a transaction for Facebook advertising. Facebook allows you to target people in a certain zip code. And so you could target people in your community who have mentioned cancer before as one of their interests, like a cancer care group might be looking for. So we're going to go ahead and pay for some advertising from Facebook. Well, let me show you how to set up a payee to start. So we're going to go back to Settings and go to Payees, and you'll see here's Office Express. So Office Express, I just typed them in before on the check and it was added. Now I can add things like their address Main Street, St. Louis, Missouri, 63118, 8325. Oops. $23.99, and that's just going to add that. But I can also go ahead and add a new one. And so we're going to put Facebook in there. Oops, if I can type correctly. And they are actually at one hacker away, kind of an inside joke apparently there at Facebook. In Menlo Park, California, 94025. And we don't have a phone number for Facebook because Facebook doesn't like to use phones. They're an internet company. So now they've been added to this. And from payees, I can go here and click on history and see the transactions that they have in the different accounts associated with it. Some really great stuff. Okay, let's go and create a new payment. And we're going to put this on our credit card. So call this Facebook advertising. And we're going to say Facebook is the payee, and it's coming from our silver credit card, and it's $75. And that's going to go under our event advertising because it's Facebook advertising. And so you can see here that by using this credit card, we have selected a liability, and we can now pay for an expense with that. The credits and debits are handled just fine. Go ahead and hit save. And the transaction was created. So let's go back to our main account, and you'll see now liabilities are in there as having $75. Well, to pay a liability, we could go in and we could make a payment. We can also do a journal entry, and that's what I'm going to do right now is a journal entry. So if you're not familiar with finance, you may want to stay away from journal entries, but we're going to go ahead and pay for this in a transaction. So this requires you to understand your debits and credits. Now, I'm not going to put Facebook there because we already paid Facebook. This is the credit card company, and because of that, I don't want to put a payee. It'll show that on there in the accounts. So I'm going to be paying from my checking account, and I'm going to be paying this silver credit card. Now, you have to know debits and credits in order to do this. So in order to decrease an asset, I need to credit that account, and that's $75. And in order to decrease a liability, I need to put it under a debit. And so I'm taking money out of checking, decreasing that, and I'm putting it into my liability, which is decreasing what I owe. So that's why it's debit. And it creates a nice balanced transaction. And I can put in here pay credit card just so that we have it there, and I'll hit save. And now that has changed. So from the home tab, you can see my assets have gone down, as has my liability, because my liability had the Facebook advertising on the credit card, but then also the payment. So let's go here to the assets, and I think I'm still not at enough line items to construct a graph, and that's okay. Let's go ahead here and refresh real quickly. I forgot how many line items you need to create a graph, but we'll see that eventually. So that is how you do a journal entry. And I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, then you should probably leave the journal entries to your church treasurer. But the rest of those transactions, the transfers, the deposits, payments, checks, those are just like personal finances. You know, how often do we transfer money from checking to savings or vice versa? We often make deposits. We do payments, especially without writing checks, but checks are a different option. So all of that is stuff that you can take from your personal finances and apply to your church. And the same concepts, and again, we have to select the accounts for you based on the type of transaction you're trying to accomplish. All right, well, let's go back here. We're going to, actually, we're already on assets. We're going to show reconciliation. So we'll go to our specific bank account, and for each individual bank account, you'll get a statement at the end of each month that you'll need to reconcile. So go here to reconcile, and this goes into reconciliation mode. So on the statement, you'll get a date and a starting balance, and maybe that was 0, and the ending balance, maybe that was 500, and then you'll select those transactions that made it that way. And so as you select them, you'll see the difference comes into play. And as you keep adding it, eventually you'll get to it so that it's all balanced. And really that's what you want to do, is you want to look at your statement and see that what's the starting balance that it says, what's the ending balance, and make sure all the transactions that it has listed are there as well for you. So let's say that maybe this happened and you didn't get your last transaction, that payment of $250. So let's say that wasn't in there. And so then your starting balance would be 0 and your ending balance would be 750. So you'll see here that each of these 3 transactions gets you from 0 to 750. And you can see what makes up those different types of transactions. We can go ahead and click Save. And the items have now been reconciled. Now, down here under this account, you can see that this has been reconciled. And when you click on that, oops, that's not what I meant to do. When you hover over it, it says reconciled there with that little lock icon. So now when you go to reconcile, it only shows those non-reconciled transactions. If you're in the middle of reconciling and you say, actually, I need to go and look up my advertising, and you click on that, say, okay, look that up now. I'm going to go back, go to my savings account, go to reconcile. You can see that it's still selected there. And so that way you can leave it and come back if you've got something else that you want to look up. So that's how you reconcile a transaction, and that makes it really easy. And that's just like balancing your checking account in your personal finances. So it makes it really easy to do that. We've made it very clear that you're in reconcile mode there by doing that green. We kind of joked as we were developing that this was going into Hulk mode because it's kind of the green Hulk color. It's kind of how some of us computer people are, a little bit dorky that way, but we wanted to make it very clear that you are doing something different than just regular transactions. So that takes us through reconciliation. My next portion of my outline refers to reports. And this is the one downside to starting from the beginning. So under reports, you can see that there are 4 different types of reports. We're not going to have a lot of details in each, but I want to talk through the benefits of each one. These are the main financial reports that your congregation would use. So first up, General Ledger. Now we call this Church360 Ledger because all you're doing is creating transactions that get tied to your ledger. But General Ledger is looking at all of them in one place, line by line, and then you can filter by those lines. So you'll see here on this General Ledger report, we've got it with the date picker. You could do your entire year. You could go down to specific quarters or months or days even. But it gives you all your different transaction lines. You've got your different types of transactions, and we've got a nice selection there because we went through all the 5 types of transactions. But let's say you just wanted to see journal entries. You can do that and see that one journal entry that occurred on that date, and they balance out. Go ahead and select all. There's our check number. You can't filter by check number, and that's okay because you'd really just go to your individual checking account if you wanted to do that. If you wanted to filter by that checking account, you go here to account, and you click checking, and that becomes your basically your check ledger, if you will. All right, we're going to go ahead like that. You can also group it by account. And so you can see there, then you're not filtering by a single account, but you're grouping by each one of those. And that creates a very nice view. That same kind of thing can be done by payee. So you can see all your different transactions by payee. Even if you don't have them, they'll still show up there. But then like with the other views, you can filter by payee. And see there, that transaction had that single payee. So it allows you to do each one of these views and then print them. And so while General Ledger is a report, each one of these make up their own types of reports. So you may have a check report or a deposit report that you want to run. Well, you can quickly do that just by going to General Ledger and filtering down. You can also export this all to Excel or go to print it, and it'll print straight from your browser. There you go. All right, let's take a look at the next one, income and expense. Well, this is the report that is often reported to the congregation on a regular basis. And this shows how you're doing compared to budget. So if you wanted to do just, let's say, quarter 1, it will show you 1/16 through 3/16. And that's what you budgeted for those months. That's what actually happened. This is your percent of budget. And remaining shows your budget minus your actual. And sometimes that can be a little bit confusing to people. So that means when you see a negative $600 there, that sounds bad with your budget. But you can say, no, actually that's a good thing. We had said we would get $150. We actually got $750. That means that compared to our budget, we're actually $600 over. And so that's a little confusing, but that's the right way to account for it. Because really remaining applies to what you have left to spend. So here under publicity, we budgeted $30 for printouts. We actually spent $50, so we have negative 20 left because we spent over what we should have. In the same case, if you look at our events, we budgeted $215, we've only spent $75, and so we have $140 left to spend. And that's what makes the most sense. You can also start shrinking those down some, and if you want to print it and just look at it from the account level, you can do that from right here. So we had originally budgeted by the first quarter to come out under $95, but we've actually come up over $625. So that is your income and expense account. The next report is called your chart of accounts. And this gives you an entire view of all your accounts. It tells you what was the starting balance at the beginning of your date range, what is the ending balance at the beginning of your date range, what debits and credits and overall change occurred during that, and then what percentage. Well, since we started out at 0, the change percentage is based on the change and the ending balance. So, that's why we don't have anything in there. Actually, I think it's based on the beginning balance, which is why you don't have any. Sorry, I misspoke there. But if you're doing this from a start of the year to the end of the year, you can see a lot of change within your assets and liabilities. If you're doing it within different quarters within the year, different months, you also see that change with your income and expense. Your income and expense resets every year with the starting balance at the beginning of your fiscal year. So that's why you wouldn't see it all the time. The last thing on here is your balance sheet. And that's a very similar view, except it's just your assets and liabilities. So you'll see the same column headers, but a balance sheet is an actual snapshot of the finances that your congregation has, the actual dollars that they have in their assets less the liabilities, the amount that is owed. And so it gives you a kind of a snapshot of the financial health of your congregation. I've got just a couple minutes left, and I only have one more thing to show you. So the last thing under reports, we kind of separate this out because it's a little bit different, is your event log. So when you go to the event log, you can see all of the different activities within your ledger account. Now this goes back to that accountability that we talked about before. There's certain things you cannot prevent. If somebody puts in a faulty transaction, or even a real transaction, you can't stop them from doing that unless you have prevented them the access. But you can always see who did what and when. So you can see here each of these things that I've done, from creating new accounts to changing information about the payees, to creating new pays, to creating new transactions, to reconciliation. All of that stuff has been added in here, and I can go back at any time. So there's my reconciliation report. I can see exactly what happened during that reconciliation. I can go here to this transaction and see all the line items in the transaction. It creates that complete audit trail that you need to have in order to keep your transactions safe and secure. I did realize I skipped over one thing on here, and that will show up in the audit trail too. So I do apologize. Let me backtrack for just a second. I forgot to show you how to edit a transaction. So let's go here to journal entry. Let's say that it wasn't actually $75 that we wanted to pay. Let's say we only wanted to pay $50 of that credit card. We can go in here, change it to 50, and click Save. And now that has become an edited transaction. So in fact, yeah, there we go. So we've got that $25 there. Let me show you in the audit trail what that looks like. So you'll see here that I created a new transaction, a revision of transaction 320577. The numbers don't matter as much for you, but my new transaction has that change in there, which is a revision of this one here. And you'll see that difference. So that, if you go back, one of the most common ways to kind of fudge the system is to edit transactions. You'll see here that this does not allow you to edit the transactions without a record of it. It always creates a new transaction, kind of merges those together. So sorry for missing that one. I think I got everything else onto my my list of my outline for today. We are right at the 2 o'clock mark, so I went to that 60 minutes of presentation. Before we get into the question and answers, in case you need to get going, I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint for a second and go here to my contact information. So there is my email address and my phone number again. If you are looking to buy Church360 Ledger, our software sales team would be happy to talk to you about it. And there's their email address and there's their phone number. But before you talk to them, if you want to get started with your free trial, you can go to 360ledger.com, and we offer a free 37-day trial. Now you may be saying 37 days, that's a kind of a weird number. Usually it's 30 days. Well, that's absolutely right. Usually we offer a 30-day trial on our software, but the difference is with Church360 Ledger, you may want to start it and do transactions for a full month, but you may want to balance them at the end of the month, do the reconciliation. So we give you that additional 7 days so that you can kind of do your month-end accounting too. So if you want to start off at the beginning of the month and then do it all the way through and do your month-end, you've got the full amount of time to do that. Now, I would encourage you, if you are new, to not wait till the start of the month to try it, because we have a special promotion right now that if you order by February 29th, you can save the $199 on the startup fee. And the information on that is available at church360org.sale, or /sale, pardon me. But let me go back to my contact information. And now let's take some question and answers. So I don't have a lot of questions here. If you have any more, please go ahead and submit them. Otherwise, we'll finish up a little bit early here. But one of the first questions was related to how is our data backed up? And I mentioned that at the beginning. I know that question was sitting there. I want to hit on that one more time. Our data, because your data is stored on our servers, we are in charge of the backups. If you've used Shepherd Staff before, you may be familiar with the backup process. You don't have to worry about that with Church360 Ledger. We do that automatically for you, and it's mainly for security reasons. It's not to correct mistakes. You do that through editing transactions, and that's one of the reasons why we keep that separate, is that it's if you need to correct a mistake, running a backup or reloading a backup is not the way to do it. It's to actually go and modify the transactions and make sure that it's in that audit trail. But for security reasons, in case there's ever an issue, the data, we do back it up on a nightly basis and store those backups for 30 days. All right, my next question here. How would you enter a mortgage payment that includes interest and principal? So that's a really great question. Susan, I appreciate you giving that to me. Let me go back in here, and we'll go ahead and we'll go to the payment transaction. And so the way that I believe you do that, I'm not a financial expert by any means, but you would do that as a liability from, let's say, your checking account. And you do that as a transaction from your checking account, which is an asset. But then your liability would be your mortgage account. And we've only got one liability in here right now, and so that would be where your principal would go, and then your interest would be under an expense, and you would budget that income or that interest as part of one of your expenses during the year, and you would do it that way. And so your payment would be the full amount. Let's say it's $500, and maybe $450 was to the principal and $500 to the interest. I'm sure many people would like a mortgage like that. I know I would. Those are just numbers for example purposes. The next one would be, how do you identify 1099 vendors and the amounts you've paid them at the end of the year? And that's a really good question. Again, Susan, thank you for that. That is under here under payees. Now, we don't have actual 1099 reports. You would get the history, and so under the notes you could put that they're a 1099 payee, and then you'd go to the history and see the different transactions and set your time frame up there. We're looking at additional ways to have that be a little bit more formalized, but our churches find that works quite well. It's not real obvious, but once they see it, then it makes sense for what they need to do. So that's how you do it right now. If you need to print it in a different different way, I would recommend exporting to Excel and modifying however you would need it to, and printing it from there, because sometimes there's some different tweaks or notes that need to be added to that, and Excel is a great way to do that. The transactions are solid. Exporting to Excel wouldn't change anything. You'd want to keep those line items correct. That's how you do that. The next question Steve had is from, how is your company related to the LCMS? Well, as I mentioned before, Steve, we are Concordia Technology Solutions. Here's our website. We are actually part of Concordia Publishing House. We are a division of CPH. And the Concordia Publishing House is the publishing arm of the Missouri Synod. So we are all at our team Concordia Publishing House employees, but we have a different branding for us because we sell software. And the reason we do that is so often when people think of the publishing house, they think just books. And we do so much more than that. And we want to make sure people know that. So we go under the brand Concordia Technology Solutions. But we are the publishing arm of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Our board of directors is elected in convention with Synod, and so we are very much a part of that. But we do work with many other denominations as well. And so our products, we have the advantage of really not having much doctrine in our products. And some of them we do have some different naming and stuff, and we have different versions for the different denominations. But we are very much a part of the LCMS, although if you are not an LCMS church, that's okay. Our products will still work for you. Steve, you had a follow-up question about the backups, and it is, are backup copies kept off-site? Yes, they are. Our servers are not housed here in our building. We utilize Amazon Web Services for our servers in a variety of different ways. We have a lot of redundancy built in, and so even if, God forbid, a fire hit our building, your data would be just safe because it is kept completely off-site. And lastly, Steve, you had the question, does this program work in Canada? There's nothing to prevent it from working in Canada with an internet connection. This was built specifically for United States congregations. I think the accounting principles are almost identical, but I can't say that for sure. If you are in Canada, you could probably tell me more about the differences. So because our primary market is here in the U.S., we have focused on that. If there are differences in Canada, they're not ones that we have really modified for financial purposes. But I think basic accounting principles apply the same wherever you're at. It may be something with how checks are printed or otherwise. If you have any specific questions about that, I'd be happy to look into those and dig into them offline and get you answers. I believe that wraps up our questions for today. I'll give you another minute in case you have any other ones. Oh, there you go. Would the zip code versus postal code make a difference? Steve, I don't believe it does because we have that as an open text field here. And so you should be able to do whatever ones. Yep. Oops. There you go, I did that on Facebook. So yeah, that shouldn't make a difference at all. We have that as open text, so regardless of how postal codes or zip codes work, you can enter them in that way. And the same with the states here. It's not a drop-down list, it's an open text field. So from tracking payees, I don't think there should be any problems with that. I'll give it one more minute in case anyone else has additional questions. Oh, thank you. Reoccurring transactions. Susan, that's a great question that I completely skipped over. And that, I looked at my outline again and it's on there. Let me show you that real quick. I do appreciate that. So let's talk about, let's say that there's a reoccurring deposit. And let's say that you had a member who has pledged to donate $25 every month and you just want to have that in. Let's say it's done electronically. Well, you could go here under your asset and see that automatically gets deposited under your checking. So $25 a month, and it's cancer fund. Whoops, I typed it in. It'll create that transaction. But what you can do is say make recurring. When you click make recurring, it adds this extra box here, and you can say deposit from John Smith. And that occurs every single week, let's say every single month on the first Sunday. You could also say like the first day, so maybe it was the 15th of the month it got pulled out. We'll go ahead with that, and you click Save. Now the reoccurring transaction was created, and you can go here and see recurring transactions and see which ones. Now on the 15th of the month, it'll show up here in a little icon that says a new transaction, and you would just go in and import that transaction, finish it up like normal, and then the next month on the 15th it would show up as well. And you can go in here and modify it, but you basically are creating like a transaction template, if you will. And so you still have to pull that final trigger in case something interferes. And because when you have transactions, you can never actually delete or modify them. You can just transaction them out or edit them out, and it'll track it under an audit log. You basically are doing journal entries. We don't want to automatically apply that without your final approval. But if you have a bunch of recurring transactions, they'll just show up here in the top of your screen with a little indicator on a regular basis, and then you can go and complete them. But thank you very much for bringing that up. Like I said, I had that on my outline. I'm going to look one more time and make sure that there's nothing else I missed, because that was kind of a big one. I do appreciate you bringing that up. So I'm just reviewing that again, and I think this time I may have everything covered. Anyone else have any more questions before we wrap up for the day? All right, well, I think that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and put up my contact information one more time. Once again, my name is Peter Frank, and you can reach me best at peter.frank@cph.org. I will be putting this recording on our YouTube channel later on today or tomorrow, and I'll send you an email with that link. And if you need to share with anybody, by all means, go right ahead. But I do thank you very much for attending. I hope you found this helpful and showed you some of the main features of Church360 Ledger and how to use them. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.